Hello, heathens and heretics. 2024 is now over. What a year. Did anyone else notice that right towards the end of 2024, the holiday season yielded a nice throwback to theology and religion? I mean, technically it makes sense since we have October, the month of spirits and witchcraft, and of course December, where we have Santa and Christianity. But in recent years, it feels like all of this has been more loose, almost as if the spirit, witch, Christian themes are just a little side note. As if the holiday season is supposed to be a last minute reminder that, oh yeah, there's supposed to be a devil, and Santa and Christianity, that's still a thing too. But this past year seemed very heavy handed with the subject matter of theological indoctrination. For example, in November, the film studios released the horror thriller Heretic. This is that cinematic piece starring Hugh Grant as Mr. Reed, Sophie Thatcher as Sister Barnes, and Chloe East as Sister Paxton. Well, when I first saw the trailer, I thought this was going to be another Saw type film, or maybe something like The Cube. You know, where people are tossed into some puzzling maze labyrinth type environment and are forced to use a combination of wit and pain tolerance to survive. I had no idea that the film was essentially 90% dialogue, with a final act taking place in a single room with roughly three primary puzzles. Now, I'm not going to recap the film here. There are a variety of top notch breakdowns that execute that task quite brilliantly. Side note though, one of my personal favorite series around film breakdowns is the How to Beat or How to Survive genre. I love that there is content out there going all in on detailing the multitude of ways to survive some of the most hellish situations imaginable. As a side note to this, regarding the film Heretic, I have yet to see a breakdown of what would have happened had the girls chosen the door of disbelief. The entirety of what Mr. Reed constructed in that house is immensely reliant upon people choosing the belief door. I'm pretty sure that choosing disbelief was the cheat code to escaping relatively unharmed. But anyway, even though the film was more talky than action thriller, I thoroughly enjoyed the experience. I'm perfectly fine that this film went way more Tarantino esque dialogue heavy and less James Wan morbid puzzler. I honestly loved every minute of Heretic, and I found the knowledge bombs dropped by Mr. Reed to be a breath of fresh air that the mainstream consumer ear likely needed to hear, particularly Mr. Reed's breakdown of the bastardization of spirituality as established by the history of man made religion. I walked away from Heretic feeling fantastic over a renewed interest in deep diving the lovely subject matter behind theology and spiritualism, especially considering that I had essentially retired from thinking about this stuff since like 2005. I have my own history studying theology and spiritualism when I took several courses around the Gospels of the Christian Bible and the historical Jesus, where we analyzed fact versus myth. So, sitting there watching this Heretic film and having my interest in this arena reignited was nostalgic to say the least. I like that this film even educated me a bit, particularly around the history of copycat plagiarism with not only religion, but also with music and even board games. Granted, as with most films, at least for me, it was only the ending to Heretic that I found lacking. And this is only because I was truly expecting some next level cinematic reveal that would, hopefully, boggle the mind in its supernaturalism. I was hoping for something like the big Marduk hand at the end of Cabin in the Woods. That film, Cabin in the Woods, was all about the ancient ones, and I had convinced myself that the big hand at the end was Marduk himself. So hey, I thought, maybe Heretic will give us Tiamat. But nope, Instead, what we got was reminiscent of Jodie Foster's character meeting her father in the big alien reveal at the end of the movie Contact. Yet, on the bright side, it was great to see trending topics like Heretic Destroys Religion making its rounds across the hive mind cybersphere we call social media. After all, despite my own personal ideas regarding spirituality, I have never denied that man made religion ruins any notion behind spiritual value, which is why we see the likes of Bill Maher and Ricky Gervais operating effectively as mainstream atheists. Bill Maher has his 2008 film Religulous, where he spends a lot of time mocking any literal interpretations of the Bible. I do find people who take the Bible literally as rather humorous, so I understand why Bill Maher is going after this low hanging fruit. However, just because there are people who read the Bible and interpret its stories incorrectly doesn't mean that there is no value in the stories themselves. And it certainly doesn't mean that the rest of us, who actually find intelligent and meaningful value in the Bible stories, are equally as misguided as those who take it so literal. Let's take an example where we meet someone who is, let's say, cognitively impaired, neurodevelopmentally disabled, and their first name happens to be Bill. Does this mean that everyone whose name is Bill is neurodevelopmentally disabled by default? Of course not. And that's Bill Maher's problem. He intentionally targets the folly of taking the Bible too literally, and then he hyper focuses on labeling anyone who dares present value in the Bible as unintelligent and problematic. Not to mention that just about every single one of Bill's anti God stand up comedy bits relies on a literal interpretation of the Bible. The nuanced hypocrisy there is impressively lost on Mr. Maher. Like his bit about how it makes no sense that God is all powerful but needs to have a kid. You know, a reference to Jesus. This is a low hanging fruit attempt that ignores the fact that the idea of Jesus being the Son of God is merely a way to explain the idea that Jesus was a human who had one of the closest possible relationships a person can have with God. Thus, when your relationship with God is that close, you can think of it as a parent-child relationship. Note that whether this is historically accurate or not is irrelevant. The point is that we don't need to take it literally because it is an obvious portrayal of a concept. It's an idea to draw from. But again, Bill relies on literal interpretations to try to prove that something is inherently stupid. To understand how silly this is, I'm sure we can find evidence of Bill Maher saying and doing things that are objectively unintelligent. Surely he is not perfect. I doubt Bill Maher expects people to believe that he himself is Jesus Christ, right? So, he must have flaws. Does this mean all of his efforts are unintelligent? Is his show on HBO and all of his stand-up specials across the board unintelligent now because he did something unintelligent once or twice? Now, one of my favorite clips that has been surfacing lately is where Jordan Peterson educates Bill Maher on the very simple idea of sacrifice. In this situation, Bill Maher does his usual one-dimensional spin on how the Bible is, and I quote, comically stupid, because there are stories where people can bargain with God, and therefore that makes God corrupt. Again, with Bill Maher's obsessive need to focus on the literal. Thankfully, Jordan Peterson is able to help poor Bill remember that anyone who is successful in life makes some form of self-sacrifice. Like, if you don't eat that cake tonight, you may be healthier tomorrow. Anyone who tries to reach some measure of success in a goal typically makes some form of a sacrifice. If you want money, then you have to work. That is a sacrifice of your time. If you want to have a certain body type, then you have to sacrifice your dieting habits. If you want a certain amount of financial freedom, then you have to sacrifice your spending habits. This is all fairly simple stuff. And as Jordan Peterson points out, these are all forms of bargaining that we make with the future. A story about a covenant with God is a story of a bargain with the future. It has nothing to do with literal contract negotiations that expose a corrupt deity. But none of this matters to the mind of a Bill Maher persona, because this type of mind has essentially become addicted to the self-serving happiness that comes from consuming massive amounts of low-hanging fruit without regard for the complex processes surrounding what allowed that fruit to exist in the first place. Okay, so heretic, Bill Maher, Jordan Peterson, those are the things that the cybersphere algorithm were feeding me at the end of 2024. But that wasn't the end of it. This annoying as hell clip of Ricky Gervais kept popping up. The one where some guy presents a 3-door dilemma. One door is labeled, God exists. A second door is labeled, God doesn't exist. And a third door is labeled, I don't know. To which Ricky responds, that doesn't make sense. He goes on to claim that you not knowing is irrelevant to whether there is or isn't a God. He then goes on to state, you've done a sleight of hand there on a category mistake, because 1 is knowledge and 2 are beliefs. After which Ricky proposes a new dilemma with only 2 doors. One door is, I believe there's a God. The second door is, I don't believe there's a God. And he asks, I don't know is irrelevant then, isn't it? Then there's the applause, and the clip cuts out as if Captain Steubing here landed some sort of checkmate. He didn't. Because, oh my goodness, in the original 3-door dilemma, all 3 doors are knowledge. And knowledge itself requires belief. You cannot have knowledge without belief. Let me explain. Pretend we are talking about the shape of the earth. As it stands today, we live in a world where there are people who believe the earth is round and people who believe the earth is flat. One thing is for sure, no matter which side of that fence you reside, chances are that you haven't gone to outer space to confirm it yourself. With that in mind, we can present 3 doors. The earth is round, the earth is flat, I don't know. The fact is that the earth exists and maintains its shape regardless of what you think you know. All life on earth can be wiped out tomorrow, and the shape of the earth will continue to exist as a universal truth. Now, Ricky tries to claim that the first 2 doors are belief and the third door is knowledge. But what exactly is knowledge? Well, knowledge is belief in a fact. For those of us who have not been to outer space, we consider ourselves knowledgeable that the earth is round and gravity is real. Granted, it is belief with observable and repeatable hard evidence, but it is still belief nonetheless. You are choosing to believe that the evidence you are observing is true. You are choosing to accept measurable and repeatable results as justifiable evidence that something is true. Choosing to accept something is choosing to believe. So we can accurately restate the 3-door earth dilemma as, I have knowledge that the earth is round, I have knowledge that the earth is flat, I have no knowledge of the earth's shape. Or we can rephrase it Ricky's way as, I believe the earth is round, I believe the earth is flat. But we would still have that third door, which would be, I have no belief in the shape of the earth. This whole idea of knowledge versus belief is very often misrepresented by what I often refer to as atheist messiahs like Ricky Gervais and Bill Maher. Ricky's understanding of the original three-door dilemma is misguided and uneducated. His attempt to present the dilemma as a two-door belief system instead is, quite frankly, hard to listen to and hard to watch. And speaking of being hard to listen to, Billy Carson has entered the chat. I really went down that Billy Carson self-destructs after getting destroyed by the Jack Reacher of Theology rabbit hole. If you are not familiar with this, then I highly recommend looking up Billy Carson Debates Wes Huff. That is a lesson in humility if there ever was one. I will say that I am guilty of being intrigued by the initial claims Billy Carson was making. In 2024, I watched a few of Carson's videos around the Emerald Tablets, and he really captured my interest with his claim that this ancient character named Thoth is the original Jesus. According to Billy Carson, there are these ancient writings known as the Emerald Tablets that speak of someone who walked the earth and experienced pretty much the exact same life events as the man we call Jesus Christ. Only in this case, all of this happened way before Jesus was born. So the ultimate claim here is that the story of Jesus Christ is a plagiarized story of Thoth. The only problem is the Emerald Tablets aren't real. Now, there is one single Emerald Tablet that has been found, but it has nothing to do with the story of Jesus Christ. You see, there was once a clever man named Maurice Doreal. He claims to have discovered and interpreted the Emerald Tablets of Thoth. And where exactly do these Emerald Tablets reside, one may ask? Nobody knows. According to our man Maurice, he found them in a super secret chamber. And through the power of divine something something, he was able to understand and translate them. Unfortunately, that same divine something didn't give him the power to find his way back to the super secret chamber to prove that these things actually exist. And sadly, he didn't have a pencil and paper handy to draw a map of his discovery. Oh gosh darn. Billy Carson saw this as a great opportunity to make some money, because anything that attacks the low-hanging fruit of the Christian Bible is the perfect magnet for the atheist checkbook and credit card. In other words, Billy Carson took a page out of Bill Maher's How to Consume Low-Hanging Fruit for Rich Rewards handbook. I wonder if there is something going on with people named Bill after all. But I digress. Now, what Billy Carson did was quite clever. He presented a real picture of the true singular Emerald Tablet. And then he did the bait and switch technique by pretending that this single Emerald Tablet represents the Emerald Tablet collection, plural, that good old Maurice Doreal calls the Emerald Tablets of Thoth. To put that in perspective, it would be like me showing you a single $1 bill and then claiming that this is evidence that I am a millionaire. Because, after all, what is $1 million other than a collection of $1 bills? On top of all this, Billy Carson made bold claims to know more about Christianity and ancient texts than anyone else on the planet. Which is where Wes Huff comes in, because Wes is an actual scholar and expert in this field of study. And he made short work of exposing Billy Carson as little more than a snake oil salesman. So again, if you haven't watched what Wes did to Billy, I highly recommend it. And wow, what a way to close out 2024. Something tells me that 2025 is going to bring some intriguing topics. If you made it this far, thanks for your time. And remember, only tip for good service and always courtesy flush. Stay healthy.